Hello and welcome to everybody. Thank you for joining us to another virtual learning series. This is Gunnison Country, a mountain wonderland, and this is episode 5. It's water in Colorado in the American West. Before we dive in, just want to give a quick thanks to our sponsors, one, Gunnison Trails and Hartman Castle Preservation Fund, as well as the people just like you, participants, members, and donors. Your support makes all this possible, so we do greatly appreciate it. We have a couple events coming up. One will be on the mountain. It's a Mount Crested Butte Historic Talk, and we will be providing a pop-up exhibit. This will be our third and final one that we do in this portion of events with Mount Crested Butte, but that's February 12th. They're expecting about 250 people, so online registration will be available soon, and we will put that on our website and social media. We also have a historic pub crawl, coming up Monday, February 26th, and tickets will be available on our website under the events tab. Dwayne will be speaking at one of the stops, George Sibley, and also Polly Brosler, So yeah, thank you very much. And without further ado, we will get going.
Well, thank you very much, Stu, and welcome everybody to the presentation on water. Before we get started, I'm going to give you a couple of quick things. Next week, we're going to be talking on the Black Canyon of the Gunnison, and this is going to be the prize tonight for our trivia questions. I'm going to have 2 trivia questions at the end. First come, first served. Stu will tell you how to answer, and whoever wins is going to go ahead and get the book on the Black Canyon. So we're going to be talking about water today. We're going to do something a little more unusual. That's good right there. Instead of putting pictures selectively through the presentation, I'm going to start off with 8 photos involving water. And then when we get over to the Black Canyon and the Gunnison Tunnel, we're going to go into 7 more. And I'll give you a little description of each one of those. So the talk tonight is going to be started off with a description of some of the pictures that you're going to see. Now, there's 2 great books on water in Colorado, and that is obviously the #1 important thing in the Gunnison Country, Colorado, and the West. Water. Nothing else comes close. There's a great book by Norris Hundley, Hundley, called Water and the West, that talks about the Colorado River Compact of 1922, which is really the law of the river. The other one is a great book by my good friend George Sibley, and it's called Water Wranglers, Wranglers. You'll see that on our first photo tonight. Now, George Sibley also has a blog, and I'm going to give you the blog. It's about every 3 weeks, and I'll spell it for you. Everything's lowercase with no commas. Sibleys, and then rivers.com, sibleysrivers.com. So here we go. We're going to hit the first photo right now. Now, there is a shot of George's book called The Water Wranglers, which talks about the 75-year history of the Colorado River District and really covers water generally throughout the state of Colorado. Next. There is the digging of the Alva Adams Tunnel, 13 miles from Grand Lake to Lake Estes, right outside of Estes Park, and then down the Big Thompson Canyon into Loveland and Longmont for irrigation. It is a massive undertaking to dig these tunnels underneath the Continental Divide. Next. There is a good shot of the Colorado River Basin and the lower Colorado River Basin. The upper part is the Colorado River and its tributaries with the river's head, and then down below is where they flow to. More about that later on. Next. There's a good shot of the opening of the Roberts Tunnel. That tunnel was built from 1958 to 62. It really created Lake Dillon. And then a 23-mile tunnel brought water from Lake Dillon underneath the ground, and it came out at Bailey, right near Bailey, or Grant, I should say, on Highway 285, and from there down the South Platte River into Denver for their use. Next. There is a shot of the Upper Colorado River Storage Act that we're going to talk about. 6 dams on the upper basin to hold water for lower basin use later on. And you can see over on the right, 3 of them are on the Gunnison River within 30 miles of here: Blue Mesa, Morro Point, and the Crystal Dam. Next. There is a great shot of the Blue Mesa Dam, backing up 946,000 acre-feet of water. And it is the largest body of water in Colorado. And that dam was built and finished in 1965. Next. And there's our last one until we get over to the Black Canyon. That is a shot of Lake Powell, and it just shows you how dire our droughts have been. That all that white you see is where the water ought to be. So, about 50 feet below where it ought to be. So we're going to get off of that now, and we're going to talk about water until we get to the Black Canyon and the Gunnison Tunnel, and then we will get into some more pictures. John Wesley Powell, 1877. The history of the American West will be determined by acre-feet of water. Zebulon Pike, exploring the southern area of the newly bought Louisiana Purchase Territory, 1806-1807, declared that much of it was desert. Stephen Long, during his 1819 and 20 expedition in the West, referred to the area he had been through as the, quote, the Great American Desert, unquote. In 1877, Powell wrote a great analysis of the American West entitled Arid Regions of the West. 8 years earlier, he had been the first man to go down the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon. He understood the West better than anybody before him or after him, and in this great paper, Arid Regions of the West, he made the following points. Number 1, there is not plenty more where that came from. And Powell became one of the first conservationists of the West and declared that the nation had to take care of its water, land, and timber, all of its resources. Secondly, he said, much of the land in the West was not suitable for farming because of the lack of water. Thirdly, he said, if one does farm, irrigation would be absolutely essential to success. Without irrigation, you're not going to make it. Number 4, he said, ranching was the natural way of making a living in much of the West. Millions of buffalo had existed on the tall grass for centuries on the Great Plains, and cattle could do the same. Number 5, the Homestead Act, he said, in 1862, which gave 160 acres of federal land for farming, didn't work in arid Colorado or the West. Anybody who knows anything about the aridity of this area knows you couldn't raise one cow on 160 acres, so it didn't apply. And finally, he said, there was only one agency able to build gigantic irrigation and reclamation projects necessary for success in Colorado and the West, and that was the federal government. John Wesley Powell went on to become the father of federal or government bureaus designed to do just that. So here are the agencies, the federal agencies that owe their origin to Powell. Bureau of Land Management, Bureau of Reclamation, Soil Conservation Service, Bureau of Mines, U.S. Forest Service, U.S. Park Service, and the United States Geological Survey. Walter Prescott Webb, a young professor at the University of Texas in 1922, read a great book by Emerson Hough called The Way West, in which Hough said that the West had been settled by the rifle, the horse, the axe, and the boat. Walter Prescott Webb knew that without any timber, it sure as hell wasn't settled by the axe out on the Great Plains, and it sure wasn't settled by the boat because there's no navigable rivers. And as a result, he wrote the Great Plains to explain how that area developed. He said that anybody using the same farming techniques from east of the Mississippi in the West was doomed to failure, simply because there was no timber, little water, and high wind. Later on, Wallace Stegner, in a great book Beyond the 100th Meridian, echoed the views of Walter Prescott Webb. Today, Los Angeles has a local water supply capable of supporting 8% of its population, San Diego 10%, Denver 20%, and Las Vegas, Phoenix, Tucson, Lubbock, and many other Western and Colorado cities much less. They got less water. The state of Colorado averages 11 inches of rain a year, and that's often overlooked because of the tremendous amount of water that runs off with snow runoff in the spring of the year. One of the great statistics that we have, the western slope of Colorado, the western 1/3 of the state, has 10% of the state's population, 33% of the land area, and produces 70% of all the water. And therein lie many tales of woe, leading to such expressions as the water is where the people ain't, whiskey is for drinking, water is for fighting, the South Platte River, too thick to drink, too thin to plow. Water is the most cussed and discussed topic in the West. And finally, the great statement by ex-Governor John Love of Colorado, water runs uphill towards money. 40 million people in 7 states in the Southwest rely on Colorado River water, and the same depend on it for electricity. There are 10 dams and 80 diversions on the Colorado River, which no longer makes it to the Gulf of California and the Pacific Ocean. A little bit about early irrigation now in Colorado. Mesa Verde, the people of Mesa Verde, 1 to 1300, southwestern Colorado, between Durango and Cortez, right off Highway 160. As you travel on 160, there's a high mesa 2,000 feet above the valley floor below. And there for 1,300 years, the Native Americans there irrigated the top of the mesa, terraced the ravines down to the valley floor below, and had reservoirs and irrigation ditches on the valley floor. Unfortunately, they left southwestern Colorado and the Four Corners area because of a 27-year drought from 1272 to 1299. They were followed by early Mexican farming ditches, running from streams to bottomlands nearby in southern Colorado. The San Luis Ditch is the oldest in Colorado and dates back to 1851. Other early ditches came on Hardscrabble Creek near Florence, Fountain Creek near Colorado Springs, Greenhorn Creek near Rye, and Conejos Creek in the San Luis Valley. They were all small affairs and used by retired mountain men or Mexican farmers, and the only thing they could irrigate was on the bottomland, not too far from the river. In 1861, just after the Colorado Gold Rush, a miner by the name of David Wall irrigated 2 acres of land near Golden, and he found that the crops he raised were tremendous. Wall now made good money selling his produce to the mining camps up Clear Creek Canyon, cities like Central City and Georgetown and Nevadaville and Empire. And he knew if you could get water on the land was rich. In 1870, Nathan Meeker, with the backing of fellow newspaper man in New York, Horace Greeley, began the Union Colony where Greeley is today. With more men to work collectively, Meeker dug canals from the Platte and Poudre rivers and now got water farther away from the bottomland. Water was taken from the river to bench lands, irrigating more land than ever before. With more and more water taken out of streams, early settlers found that especially later in the year, there was not enough water for irrigation. This led to the pumping of water from underground aquifers, the most famous of which was the Ogallala Aquifer, which included eastern Colorado and adjoining states. That aquifer covers 174,000 square miles, almost twice the size of Colorado, and contains as much water as Lake Huron. The windmill, taking advantage of the prairie winds, which averaged 10 to 12 miles an hour, made that pumping possible. Later on, gas-powered pumps allowed for much more water to be pumped from the aquifer, leading to $20 billion of food being produced. Unfortunately, as time went on, aquifers began to get depleted, and the water table dropped alarmingly. Aquifers in eastern Colorado and the Great Plains shrank twice as fast from 2011 and 16 as in the previous 60 years. Today, you got to be very lucky to get a permit to drill a well on your own land out in eastern Colorado. Once an aquifer is depleted, it takes a long time to recover. And around the world, aquifers are in trouble. With water at a premium, Kansas and other Great Plains states came up with an idea, the Great Canal of Kansas. This proposed canal would pump Missouri River water 300 miles uphill into areas to the west, including Colorado. The estimated cost of $20 billion to build that canal and the cost of energy to do it coming in at $500 million a year quashed that idea for the moment. And now we come to a guy by the name of Thomas Malthus and the Malthusian theory before we go on. Malthus in 1799 wrote a book called Essay on the Principles of Population, in which he said, food supply goes up arithmetically. Population goes up geometrically. Man and his wife have 4 children. Their 4 children each have 4 children. And ultimately, said Malthus, the population outruns the food supply. Paul Ehrlich, who used to summer here in Gothic and Crested Butte, wrote a great book called The Population Bomb, saying the same thing. And we got the same problem with water, and we'll get to that in a moment. And now we're going to turn on the photos for the Black Canyon, because I'm going to talk about the Black Canyon now in the Gunnison Tunnel. So here we go on that. And we come to photograph number 1. Now, I'll be talking about this momentarily. This is the east portal or river portal of the Gunnison Tunnel, which was built diverting water from the Gunnison River to the Uncompahgre Valley. Next. There is the tunnel as it was built in 1909, running from the Black Canyon under Vernal Mesa and into the Uncompahgre Valley. And those tracks you see were used by cars to get, ore cars to get rocks out. You'll see in a later photo that this has now been cemented in. Next. There are the men digging the Gunnison Tunnel. They dug from both sides, west portal and east portal. 29 guys died digging the Gunnison Tunnel. Next. There is Montrose, September 23rd, 1909. Big celebration with the Gunnison Tunnel now finished. Next. There is Luwani, better known as the West Portal. As you go to Montrose, if you know where to look, you can see about 8 miles from Montrose. That is where that was. Now, the top picture shows where the men lived, and the bottom picture is the powerhouse. And that's a pretty big powerhouse. Next. There is President William Howard Taft coming to Luwani, which is the West Portal, throwing the switch to start the water flowing. September 23rd, 1909. Gunnison Tunnel complete. Next. And there's the last one. I'm in there. This was about 25 years ago. Glenn Phillips, the ditch rider for the Uncompahgre project. And while Glenn is coming towards me, I'm taking a picture. You can drive a car through there. You got to do it in the fall when they're not irrigating. And you can see now that the Gunnison Tunnel has been cemented in. And that's our last photograph. So now we're going to get to the Gunnison Tunnel. In the year 1900, the Uncompahgre Valley on Colorado's western slope, with Montrose in the middle, and Delta, and Olathe, and Pea Green, and Ridgeway, they were going dry. The Uncompahgre River did not have enough water to irrigate, and people were leaving. There wasn't enough water in the Uncompahgre River. 175,000 possible irrigable acres in the valley, but only enough water for 35,000. That led to the newly formed Bureau of Reclamation, started in 1901, to engage in the first great reclamation project in the United States, the building of a 6-mile-long Gunnison Tunnel. It was called the Uncompahgre Project. That tunnel was driven under Vernal Mesa and diverted Gunnison River water in the Black Canyon underneath the mesa by gravity. The Gunnison River, fortunately, in the canyon is higher than the Uncompahgre Valley, so it could go by gravity into the Uncompahgre Valley. Hundreds of men worked from River Portal in the canyon and Luwani or West Portal out of the canyon. The construction of the tunnel went on from 1904 to 1909. It cost $10 million. And when crews met in the middle, they were less than an inch off. Water running through the Gunnison Tunnel saved the ranchers and the farmers of the Uncompahgre Valley, and it marked a new era in reclamation in the American West. So the towns of Delta and Olathe and Montrose and Ridgeway and Kelowna all exist today because of the water diverted into the Uncompahgre Valley from the Gunnison River through the Gunnison Tunnel in 1909. With more and more people coming to Denver and the Front Range after World War I, the Bureau of Reclamation now decided it was time to divert water from the western slope under the Continental Divide and bring it to the growing Front Range. This led to a series of trans-mountain water diversions. The first big one was the Moffat Tunnel, built in 1928, taking water from the Fraser River in Middle Park on the western slope and running it through the Moffat Tunnel, 6-mile tunnel paralleling Amtrak's railroad tunnel of today. That water wound up being used by a growing Denver. In 1937 came the granddaddy of them all, the Colorado Big Thompson Project. Work would go on from 1937 to 1953 because World War II intervened. This Bureau of Reclamation project cost $160 million, and it diverted Colorado River water at Grand Lake in Middle Park, ran it under a 13.3-mile Alva Adams tunnel, and brought it out to Lake Estes near Estes Park. From there, it ran down the Big Thompson River into Longmont and Loveland for irrigation. Of the 500,000 acre-feet of water diverted from the western slope to the eastern slope, Colorado Big Thompson has the right to divert 310,000 acre-feet. So it's the granddaddy of them all. The Roberts Tunnel was another trans-mountain diversion. That tunnel was built from 1958 to 62, damming up the Blue River on the western slope, creating Lake Dillon near Silverthorne. From there, a 23-mile-long underground tunnel was constructed, and water was taken to a branch of the South Platte River near Grant on Highway 285, and then on to Denver. When you go by Grant today, if you look on the left side of the road, you can see a big white opening, and that's where the water comes out. And one more major diversion was the Frying Pan, Arkansas project, built from 1962 to 74. That one took water from the Frying Pan River near Basalt on the western slope, created the Rudeye Reservoir near Basalt for western slope use, and then drove a 6-mile-long Boosted Tunnel underneath Hagerman Pass, with the water going to Turquoise Lake near Leadville, and then down the Arkansas River and into Pueblo, and the Pueblo Dam was created, and further downstream into southeastern Colorado. Today, there are 38 trans-mountain water diversions carrying 500,000 acre-feet of water from the western slope to the eastern slope. And incidentally, an acre-foot of water is 1 foot of water covering 1 acre. Now we come to court cases. Water was the lifeblood of Colorado in the West, and as population increased and water became limited, Western states fought each other for it with lawsuits. The first major case was Kansas versus Colorado, which went before the U.S. Supreme Court in 1901 and wasn't decided until 1907. And this one involved the Arkansas River and 2 different water doctrines. Much of Kansas used the doctrine of riparian rights, and that water doctrine states that anybody living on a river had the right to use the water as it passed by his or her property, with 2 exceptions. Number 1, you couldn't take so much out of the river that you stopped steamboats from operating or mill wheels from turning. Well, obviously, that was a water doctrine for an area that had a lot of water. We're talking now about the Mississippi and the Ohio and the Tennessee. Nobody's going to worry if you take a little water out as it goes by your property. Colorado, however, used a different water doctrine in an arid land, and that was the doctrine of prior appropriation. And that doctrine said, first in time, first in use. Whoever had the first water rights ruled. And secondly, use it or lose it. Nobody could hoard water in an arid land. If you couldn't prove that you could use it, you had to give it up to somebody who could. And that was the water right west of the Mississippi River in an arid land. Now, the Arkansas River heads off Fremont Pass above Leadville and goes through the Royal Gorge and Pueblo and then into southeastern Colorado and keeps right on going till it runs into the Mississippi. Kansas invoked riparian rights and demanded an end to diversions in Colorado, which they said deprived them of water downstream. Colorado declared that it had right of international law, that it controlled all rivers heading in the state, such as the Arkansas. Now, I can tell you that that's a good move by Colorado, because the Colorado River, the Rio Grande River, the South Platte River, and the Arkansas River all head in Colorado. Colorado also told the court that Kansas was taking water out of the Arkansas River, depriving Oklahoma farmers downstream. On top of that, Kansas also used prior appropriation in the drier or western part of the state. The Supreme Court ruled in Colorado's favor, saying that Kansas had not been harmed by Colorado. But ominously, as Colorado began to celebrate, over the ticker tape came equitable apportionment. That was something that the Supreme Court said and implied that it didn't make any difference where rivers headed. Everybody on the river had a right to a share, and that was a big blow to Colorado's international law. That case took 6 years, cost a lot of money, and neither side got what it wanted. Further litigation seemed to be the only way to solve disputes. However, it would take one more Supreme Court case to show Western states that lawsuits were not the way to go. And that court case was Wyoming versus Colorado, which took 11 years, 1911 to 22, for the Supreme Court to decide. In this case, Colorado wanted to divert water from the Laramie Basin and River into the Poudre Basin, where Fort Collins is. Now, the Laramie River and the Laramie Basin are in Wyoming. So you're taking water out of one basin and moving it into another basin. This plan, moving water from one basin to another, would have made it impossible for the return flow. That's diverted water which finds its way back into the main stream. And 50% of all irrigated water goes back into the main stream. This case involved two states with the same water rights, unlike the Kansas case. Both states now use prior appropriation. The Supreme Court ruling in 1922 made the following points. Number one, water could be taken or diverted from one basin to another, but only if the basin getting the water had prior appropriation rights. Number two, the Supreme Court showed that Colorado or the Poudre Basin only had rights to 15,500 acre-feet of the Laramie River, not nearly enough to build a tunnel to divert it. This case took more time, 11 years, cost more money, and settled nothing. And now, all the states in the Southwest came to the realization that litigation was not the solution to their water problem. They were also very worried because the federal government wanted to claim all unappropriated water in the West's unnavigable streams. An interstate treaty would be the answer. The 7 states involved with the Colorado River and its tributaries would have to agree amongst themselves who got what. And during the hot summer of 1922 in Santa Fe, New Mexico, representatives of the 7 states gathered with Secretary of Commerce Herbert Hoover, later on a president, to divide the waters of the Colorado River. And that is one of the great river compacts of all time, called the Colorado River Compact of 1922. Colorado was extremely lucky to have as its representative Delph Carpenter of Greeley, one of the top water lawyers in the nation. A lot of the other states sent politicians. Carpenter was alarmed at the fast growth of California, which he thought might claim so much of the Colorado River that there wouldn't be any water left for upstream states like Colorado in the future. Carpenter demanded that the compact give upper basin states on the river a share of its flow, regardless of whether the states had yet put it to beneficial use. That compact would do just that. It set up what we call today the law of the river, a big end around the doctrine of prior appropriation. Here are the provisions of the Colorado River Compact of 1922, which has now been studied all over the world. Number one, the 7 states on or around the Colorado River would be divided into upper basin and lower basin, with the dividing line at Lee's Ferry near Page in northern Arizona, the site of today's Glen Canyon. The lower basin states, where the Colorado River and its tributaries flowed to, were California, Nevada, and Arizona. The upper basin states, where the rivers headed, were Colorado, Utah, New Mexico, and Wyoming. Secondly, it was assumed that the Colorado River produced 20 million acre-feet of water a year, though scientific studies had indicated that that figure was high. Politics now got in the way. Number 3, the length of the compact would be in perpetuity, forever. Delph Carpenter did not want the federal government, Supreme Court, or lower basin states to ever be able to change it. Number 4, the upper basin states agreed to allow an average of 7.5 million acre-feet of water to go to the lower basin yearly, going right by Lee's Ferry. Still, 5 million surplus, so the upper basin also was guaranteed 7.5 million. The lower basin gets 7.5 million, and with an estimated 20 million in the Colorado River, 5 million surplus. Number 5, any excess water would go to the area of greatest need. No one in 1922 could then see the growth of Arizona, Nevada, and California. And I like to say that there wouldn't be 9 people named Claude living in Las Vegas, Nevada, if it wasn't for air conditioning. And the same thing in Arizona and Southern California. Air conditioning made it possible for those states to grow. Number 6 in the compact, navigation and power are secondary to domestic and agricultural use. And lastly, Mexico, also on the Colorado River, would get 1,500,000 acre-feet of water a year, taken equally from the upper and lower basin allotments. Now, the upper basin states were hurt by the compact because since 1922, there's only been an average of 14 million acre-feet of water coming from the Colorado River, not 20. So our amount of water we get every year is 6.5 million. The upper basin was further hurt because the area of greatest need since 1922 has been in the lower basin states. But it also gained tremendously because the law of the river now superseded the doctrine of prior appropriation. You didn't have to put the water to beneficial use. You were guaranteed a certain amount. The Colorado River is the most important river in the U.S., even though it's only 6th in acre-feet of water. It's most important because it's the only real source of water in the Southwest. In the Upper Colorado River Basin Act of 1948, the upper basin states, the 4 of them, decided who would get what from the Colorado River. Colorado would get 51.75%, Utah 23% of the river, Wyoming 14%, and New Mexico 11%. They agreed that amongst themselves. And one more thing, in Winters versus the U.S. 1908, the Supreme Court had ruled that Native Americans had water rights on their reservations. And just because the Colorado River Compact ignored that, didn't eliminate them. By the 1950s, it was obvious that there was a great need for storage of water in the upper basin, so it could deliver water to the lower basin when needed. The upper basin also wanted storage of water for itself, and this led to the Upper Colorado River Storage Act of 1956, led through Congress by West Slope Congressman and head of the House Interior and Insular Affairs Committee, Wayne Aspinall. Western Colorado was very lucky to have as the head of that committee which controlled all land and water legislation. Two men. Ed Taylor from Glenwood Springs was head from 1908 to 41. And Wayne Aspinall of Palisade was the head from 48 to 72. Now, Wayne Aspinall ran a very tight committee, and I'll give you a good idea. I got to know him pretty well because he came up for our water workshops. Glenn Saunders, the head of the Denver Water Board, told me one day that Phil Burton, a five-term congressman from California, San Diego, and a Democrat, fellow Democrat with Aspinall, was quoted in the paper one day as saying Aspinall runs his committee so tough that you got to raise your hand and go to the bathroom, which was true. Aspinall called Phil Burton in the next morning, very early, about 8 o'clock. He said, "Phil, is this true?" And Burton said, "Well, Mr. Chairman, it's true, but I was only kidding." And Wayne Aspinall said, "Phil, you got a river and harbor bill outside of San Diego that you want, don't you?" And Phil Burton said, "Yes, sir, I do, Mr. Chairman." And Wayne Aspinall said, "Do I make myself clear? There's going to be no more wise ass comments if you want that river and harbor bill." So the Upper Colorado River Storage Act, which is also called the Kirikanti Unit on the Gunnison River, called for the building of 6 dams in the upper basin states to hold water to send down to the lower basin. Navajo Dam on the San Juan River near Farmington, New Mexico. Flaming Gorge on the Green River in southern Wyoming. Glen Canyon near Page, Arizona. And then there were 3 on the Gunnison River: Blue Mesa, Morrow Point, and Crystal. It also called for the construction of projects for the upper basin, such as the Paonia Reservoir, Crawford Reservoir, and Ridgeway Reservoir. The water situation in Colorado and the West is very dire today in 2024. The Colorado River is overappropriated, simply not enough water to supply the 40 million people in the Southwest who depend on it. Mountain snowpack in the West has declined 15% of the last 20 years, and Colorado River flows are down nearly 20%, along with the depletion of aquifers. Fights over water in Colorado and the Gunnison country and the West will involve in the future industry, agriculture, recreation, cities, environmentalists, power companies, the federal government, and developers. We must accept the fact today that we live in an arid land and act accordingly. The day is fast approaching when we may see the great eastward movement, when people have to leave Colorado and western states and move east where the water is. President Gerald Ford once declared in Mountaineer Bowl in Gunnison that, quote, "Education costs a lot, but ignorance costs a lot more," and that's certainly true with water. The only thing that stops growth and more population is economics. When water bills rise to thousands of dollars a month, that'll stop growth. Many people would like to live in Aspen or Jackson Hole, but with the average price of a house, $2 to $3 million, they can't afford it. The western slope where the water is and the eastern slope which wants it will continue to fight each other. The western slope view of the Front Range is, they say the Front Range in any negotiation says, what's mine is mine and what's yours is negotiable. In Audubon Society versus Los Angeles a number of years ago, the public trust doctrine was stated. This one would give the public rights involving rivers, in direct contradiction of the doctrine of prior appropriation. Streams, fish have rights also. The major problem regarding water, however, may be climate change. The National Research Council said recently that the Earth is the hottest it has been in 400 years. It declares, and I quote, "Climate change and soaring population across Southwest threatens to overwhelm the main water source for millions. The Colorado Basin is going to face costly, controversial, and unavoidable trade-off choices along with demands, threatening the area's ability to cope with droughts and water shortages." So water, the lifeblood of the Gunnison country, the lifeblood of the Western Slope, the lifeblood of Colorado in the West, and not enough of it. What does the future hold?